The kitchen smelled like burnt sage and box stuffing mix, and it was 4:52 in the afternoon on a Tuesday when my mother said the sentence that ended 11 years of my life without her noticing she'd done it. We already told Brooke you wouldn't be coming. She doesn't want the drama this year. I was standing in my own kitchen 400 miles away. Phone on speaker, a wooden spoon in my hand, stirring a pot of something for a dinner I was now apparently uninvited from before I'd even been invited to it. My father didn't say anything. He never did. My sister Brooke was on the call too. I could hear her breathing, that particular satisfied kind of quiet. "Okay," I said. Just that. I set the spoon down on the counter, very gently, so it wouldn't clatter. But here's what none of them knew yet. 3 days earlier, sitting at my desk at the firm, I had pulled a probate file that had nothing to do with my family, and inside, it was a letter that was about to make my mother's Thanksgiving table a lot smaller than she planned. Welcome back to Home of Secrets. I'm Renata Cole, 39, a senior probate paralegal from Asheville, North Carolina. This is the story of how my family cut me out of a holiday to keep the peace, and how a piece of paper I found completely by accident took the peace away from them instead. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, and if you haven't already, subscribe. You're going to want to see how this one ends. I was the older daughter, which in my family meant I was the load-bearing wall. Brooke was born 4 years after me, and from the day she came home from the hospital, my job quietly shifted from daughter to helper. Nobody sat me down and told me this. It just happened. The way water finds the lowest point in a room. I have a memory from when I was 11. I'd made honor roll every semester since 3rd grade, and that spring I'd also won a regional essay contest. An actual plaque, my name engraved on a little brass plate. My mother put it in a drawer in the hallway credenza because, she said, "We don't want to make Brooke feel bad. She's still finding her thing." Brooke was 7. Brooke's thing, it turned out over the following 2 decades, was never actually found. What she found instead was a permanent, comfortable identity as the fragile one, the one who couldn't be upset, the one whose feelings functioned as a household thermostat everyone else adjusted around. I worked through high school at a dry cleaner's on Tunnel Road, saved $4,200 by graduation, and used it, plus a partial scholarship, to get through community college and then a paralegal certificate program without asking my parents for a dime. My GPA was a 3.91. Nobody framed that number and put it on the wall. But I remember exactly what was on the wall, because it was there for 15 years. A photo of Brooke's junior prom, in a frame with fake pearls glued to the edges, hung at eye level in the front hallway where every guest would see it first. I'm not telling you this to complain about a childhood. I'm telling you because it's the blueprint. Whatever role you get assigned early in a family, you keep getting cast in it, scene after scene, unless you refuse the part. I didn't refuse it. Not for a long, long time. I got good at it instead. I became the fixer. And fixers don't get thanked. They get depended on, which people mistake for the same thing. If you've ever been the one everyone calls when something breaks, the car, the roof, the marriage, stay with me, because this part gets worse before it gets better. My father had a stroke in March 11 years ago. Mild, the doctor said, all things considered, but it left his right hand weak and his balance unreliable, and it ended more or less overnight, his ability to keep running his small HVAC repair business. My parents had almost no savings. The lake house in Lake Lure, the one that had been in my mother's family, the one my grandmother Lorraine had helped them buy into in the 90s, had a second mortgage on it that nobody had mentioned to me until the bank started calling. I was 28. I had just gotten my first real raise at the firm, and I did the math that fixers always do, which is, if I don't do this, who will? Brooke was newly married to a man named Cody, who sold recreational boats on commission, and referred to himself, unironically, as in between deals for most of a decade. So I did it. I picked up the mortgage payment, then the property taxes, then my father's blood thinners, which insurance covered about 60% of, then a new roof on the lake house after a storm, 19,800, because my mother said insurance was being difficult, and she didn't want to bother your father with the stress of it. I kept a spreadsheet. I'm a paralegal. Of course I kept a spreadsheet. Not because I distrusted my family, because it's simply how I process the world. I make things legible. 11 years, categorized by month, by expense, by recipient. By the time of that Tuesday phone call, the running total sat at $612,400. $612,400, and not once, not one single time, was it framed, mentioned at a dinner, or acknowledged in front of extended family the way Brooke's kids' soccer trophies were. Instead, what I got over those 11 years was this. At my cousin's wedding, my mother introduced me to a table of relatives as, "And this is Renata. She does paperwork for a law office." At Easter, 3 years ago, my Aunt Carol said in front of everyone, "It's so nice Brooke and Cody are finally getting on their feet." Well, I was. That same month, wiring $4,000 to cover my parents' HVAC unit at the lake house. Because irony apparently only strikes other families. By last Thanksgiving, I had started to notice the pattern had a shape. It wasn't random unkindness. It was a system, and the system had a name in my head, even if I never said it out loud. I was the department that funded everything and got 0 credit in the annual report, while Brooke was the department that produced nothing and got the keynote speech. So that Tuesday phone call, "She doesn't want the drama this year," wasn't really about drama. Brooke wasn't afraid I'd cause a scene. Brooke was afraid I'd stop being quiet about the math, because 3 months earlier, at a birthday dinner for my mother, I had, for the first time in 11 years, mentioned the mortgage payment out loud, almost as a joke. Guess I'll cover it again, like always. And the table had gone silent in that specific way. Rooms go silent when someone said something true that everyone had agreed not to say. Brooke didn't want drama. Brooke wanted the arrangement to continue exactly as it was. My money, her comfort, and my silence, permanently, as a package deal. "Okay," I'd said on that call. I hung up. I did not cry. I did not call my mother back and ask why. I finished stirring the pot. I ate dinner alone at my kitchen counter, and then I opened my laptop and did the thing I actually know how to do, which is not confront people. It's calculate. I canceled the auto pay on the lake house mortgage that night. Not out of spite. I want to be precise about this. Because precision is the whole point of who I am. I canceled it because a person who is explicitly, deliberately excluded from a family's table has no remaining obligation to fund that table's roof. I removed myself as an authorized user on my mother's Kohl's card, which I'd added myself years earlier so she could get the employee discount through my account. I called the pharmacy that filled my father's prescriptions and removed my card as the payment method on file, effective the following billing cycle, so it wouldn't leave him without medication mid-fill. I am not a cruel person. I want that understood. I am a careful one. I changed nothing that would hurt my father physically. I changed everything that had been quietly funding my own erasure. Then I made a folder. Titled it simply, Family Documentation. I moved 11 years of Venmo receipts, wire confirmations, canceled checks, and text messages into it, organized by year. I didn't send it to anyone. I didn't post it anywhere. I just built it, the way you'd build a case file. Because some part of me, the part that had spent a decade in probate law, already knew that someday, someone in this family was going to lie about what actually happened, and I intended to be the only person in the room holding the receipts. It took less than 2 weeks for the calls to start. Not from my mother, from Aunt Carol, then from a cousin I hadn't spoken to since a wedding 4 years prior, then from a woman at my mother's church I'd met exactly once. The story, when I finally pieced it together, was this. Diane had told the extended family that I had cut off my elderly parents out of nowhere after some kind of falling out with Brooke, and that Walt's medication had been put at risk by my vindictiveness. Not one word about the 11 years, not one word about the phone call, not one word about being told on speaker that I was unwelcome at a holiday because my sister didn't want drama. I didn't call anyone back to correct it. I want you to understand why, because it wasn't restraint for its own sake. It was strategy, whether I fully admitted that to myself yet or not. Every time in my life I had tried to explain myself to this family, the explanation got twisted, retold, and used against me later, edited down to whatever sentence made me sound difficult. So this time I didn't explain. I documented. I added every secondhand version of the smear that reached me into a new tab in the same spreadsheet. Date, source, exact wording, as close as I could get it. Not to weaponize it yet, just to have it. A fixer doesn't stop fixing just because nobody's watching. She just changes what she's building. 3 weeks after that, on an ordinary Thursday, something happened that had nothing to do with any of this, and everything to do with all of it. I was covering for a colleague out on leave, and I picked up a probate file for an estate closing across town. The Whitfield estate. No relation to my family, just an unremarkable routine intake. Buried in a box of loose documents the family had brought in, old insurance papers, an expired passport, a stack of birthday cards, was a manila envelope that had gotten mixed into the wrong banker's box at some point. Probably at the storage facility both families apparently used. On it, in handwriting I would have recognized anywhere, in blue fountain pen ink that had gone slightly brown with age, was written, "For Renata, to be opened after." It was my grandmother Lorraine's handwriting. She'd died 6 years ago. I sat at my desk holding an envelope that legally had no business being in a stranger's probate file, addressed to me for 11 full minutes before I opened it, because some part of me already understood that whatever was inside was going to matter. Inside was a letter, dated 2014, 3 years before my grandmother's health began to fail, and it was unmistakably a holographic testamentary letter, handwritten, signed, dated, and witnessed by 2 names I didn't recognize, almost certainly neighbors. In it, my grandmother stated plainly that upon her death, the Lake Lure property, the deed of which she still held a documented life interest and reversionary claim on, something I only fully understood reading it with my professional eyes rather than my granddaughter's, was to pass to me, specifically, because Renata is the only one who has ever asked for nothing and given everything, and because I have watched this family lean on her for a decade without once saying thank you. My hands were not steady reading that sentence. I want to say that plainly, because everything else about this story I can tell you calmly, and that part I could not. But the letter got more complicated, and this is where my training took over from my grief. Because I remembered, clearly professionally, that in 2019, 5 years after this letter was written, a corrected codicil had been filed with the county, one that redirected the Lake Lure property's eventual disposition to Brooke, citing my grandmother's updated wishes discussed with family. I remembered this because Brooke had mentioned it once, in passing, at a dinner, framed as something my grandmother had simply decided on her own, near the end, when her memory was already going. I pulled the county filing the next morning, using my firm's database access on a file that was, again, technically none of my business, a fact I want to be honest about, because a viewer with legal training will ask, and the answer is, I flagged it internally to my supervising attorney the same day, and everything that followed went through proper channels, not personal ones. That's important. I did not become the villain of someone else's story in the process of stopping being the victim of my own. The 2019 codicil was typed, not handwritten, signed with a signature that, when I laid it beside 3 other verified samples of my grandmother's late-stage signature from her medical consent forms, public record, pulled properly through my firm's paralegal, Denise, who I looped in and who became, that week, the first person in this whole story who looked at what I'd found and said, without hesitation, "Renata, this doesn't look right, and you did the right thing bringing it to me instead of sitting on it." The witness line on the 2019 codicil had 1 name on it. 1. A valid codicil in North Carolina requires 2 witnesses. It had been filed anyway, apparently unchallenged, because my grandmother's estate was small enough and the family unified enough in its assumption of harmony that nobody had ever bothered to have a lawyer actually review it. Brooke had handled all the paperwork after Lorraine's death. Because, as my mother had put it at the time, Renata's too busy with work, and Brooke has more time. I sat with this for 4 days before I did anything. I want to be honest about that, too. I was not immediately righteous. I was, for 4 days, mostly just sad, in the specific way you're sad when you realize a person you loved tried to leave you something and got quietly overwritten by people who loved you less. On the 5th day, I called my supervising attorney, Marian Achebe into her office, laid out the documents, and asked her, not as my sister's sister, not as anyone's daughter, but as a professional asking another professional, whether this was something worth formally contesting. Marian looked at the holographic letter, looked at the improperly witnessed codicil, and looked at me for a long moment. "Renata," she said, "I've seen worse family disasters walk through that door, but I have never seen someone sit on documentation this clean for 4 days out of politeness. File it." So I did. The filing itself was unglamorous, a formal notice of contest to the 2019 codicil, supported by the original 2014 holographic letter submitted to probate court. With a hearing date set for the reading and disposition of the contested estate item to occur, as these things often do in small counties, on the courthouse steps during the scheduled public docket call, weather permitting, with all named interested parties formally notified by certified mail. Brooke got her certified letter on a Tuesday. I know this because on Wednesday, my phone started ringing, and this time it was my mother. I let it go to voicemail 4 times before I answered the 5th. I'm not proud of how satisfying that was. I am also not going to pretend it wasn't. "Renata, what is this?" my mother said. No hello. Voice tight in the specific register she used when she was frightened and trying to sound authoritative instead. "Brooke got a court letter. What did you do?" "I didn't do anything to Brooke," I said. "I found a letter Grandma Lorraine wrote to me. I gave it to a court. That's all." "You're trying to take the lake house from your own sister." "I'm trying to find out what Grandma Lorraine actually wanted," I said, since apparently nobody bothered to ask a lawyer the first time. She hung up on me. It was the first time in 11 years my mother had hung up on me instead of the other way around. And I noted, with the same flat precision I'd note anything in a case file, that this felt less like loss and more like data. 2 guilt calls followed over the next 10 days, both from my mother, one from my father, his first call to me directly in over a year, which told me more than the content of the call itself did. He didn't yell. He never does. He said quietly, "Your mother's very upset, Renata. Can't you just let this go for the family's sake?" I told him I loved him, and that I was sorry his balance was affecting his walking again, which the family group chat had mentioned in passing, and that no, I couldn't let it go, because letting it go was the thing I'd been doing for 11 years. And I'd like to try something else for a while. Then Brooke tried the ambush. My mother, I later learned, had arranged a family lunch at a restaurant near my office and texted me the address with no context except, "We need to talk. Please come for Dad." I went. I want to be clear about why. Not because I was manipulated by it, but because I wanted, professionally and personally, to see exactly what card they intended to play. And because a small, tired part of me still hoped there'd be an apology folded in there somewhere. There wasn't. Brooke was already crying when I sat down, before I'd said a word, which told its own story. "How could you do this to me?" she said, loud enough that 2 tables turned. "I have kids, Renata. Do you know what this looks like? Your own sister taking you to court?" "I didn't take you to court," I said, keeping my voice at the same volume it always is, which is, I've been told, unnervingly calm. "Grandma Lorraine's letter took you to court. I just mailed it." She was confused when she wrote that. She was old. She wrote it in 2014, I said. 5 years before your codicil. She wasn't confused. She was clear. That's the problem. Brooke stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor, said something about how I'd always been jealous, and walked out. My mother stayed, staring at her water glass, and said the only genuinely honest thing she said to me during the entire ordeal. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't have to fix it," I told her. "It's not broken. It's finally accurate." I paid for my untouched lunch and left. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning in late October. On the courthouse steps for the public docket read, ahead of the formal chamber's proceeding, a procedural quirk of our county where contested small estate items get announced publicly before the private hearing, largely so all named parties can be confirmed present. I did not expect a crowd. Estate disputes over a modest lake house in a county with 40,000 people are not, generally, spectator events. But my mother had spent 3 weeks telling anyone who'd listen that her older daughter was trying to destroy the family over a house. And my mother, it turned out, had a wider audience than she realized. Because that audience showed up, Aunt Carol was there. 2 cousins. A neighbor from the lake community who'd apparently been told I was unstable. And Brooke, in a coat too formal for a Thursday morning, with Cody standing slightly behind her, doing the thing he always did, which was nothing. I stood at the bottom of the steps with Denise beside me, holding a single folder, the original 2014 letter in a protective sleeve, the improperly witnessed codicil, and the signature comparison Marion had prepared. I said almost nothing while the clerk read the docket items aloud. That's not dramatic license. That's genuinely how these hearings work. There's no movie moment where a lawyer stands and delivers a speech. There's a clerk with a clipboard, reading case numbers into county record. But the moment happened anyway, and it happened because Brooke made it happen. When the clerk read the item, Contest of Codicil, Estate of Lorraine Whitmore Cole, Filer Renata Cole, Respondent Brooke Cole Ferris, Brooke, standing 8 feet from me on courthouse steps in front of half the family, said, loud enough for everyone to hear, the sentence I will remember for the rest of my life. She doesn't even want the house. She just can't stand that for once. Something wasn't about her. I let that sentence sit in the cold October air for a second before I answered, because I wanted every single person on those steps to have fully heard it before I spoke. You're right that I don't want the house for the money, I said. I want it because it's the one thing in this family that was never mine that Grandma decided should be. And instead of telling me that, you had a document filed with one witness signature, on a woman whose hand was too weak by 2019 to sign her own consent forms without help, which is in the medical record. Brooke, which I have, right here. I didn't raise my voice. I never did, through the entire 11-year arc of this story, and I wasn't going to start on courthouse steps with an audience. I opened the folder instead. I held up the 2014 letter, the ink still visibly darker and steadier than anything from 2019. I held up the signature comparison. I said one more sentence, the only truly cutting one I allowed myself the entire ordeal. You didn't fight me for a house, Brooke. You fought a paper trail, and paper trails don't lose. Brooke's face did something I'd genuinely never seen it do before. It went from performance to panic, in real time, in front of Aunt Carol, in front of the lake neighbor, in front of our mother. That's not, Mom said Grandma wanted, she started, and stopped, because she'd just out loud, on public record, implicated our mother in knowing about the discrepancy, which was I'd later learn from Marion. The exact moment the county's attorney present for the docket read, made a note to refer the codicil filing for further review beyond a simple probate contest. My mother didn't say a word. She stood very still, the way people stand when they realize a version of events they've been telling for weeks has just quietly caved in beneath them in front of witnesses. The formal hearing, 2 weeks later, was almost anticlimactic by comparison. Marion walked the judge through the holographic letter's validity under North Carolina law. The improperly witnessed 2019 codicil was invalidated on procedural grounds alone, before anyone even had to fully argue Brooke's intent, and the 2014 letter was upheld as the operative testamentary instrument for the property. It wasn't a movie verdict. It was a judge reading a ruling in a flat voice at 9:40 in the morning, and then everyone filing paperwork. But real life keeps accounting the way spreadsheets do. Quietly, after the drama ends, Brooke and Cody, already stretched thin on his commission income, had, I learned later through Denise, who'd stayed in the family's orbit through a cousin, been counting on the lake house as collateral for a boat dealership loan Cody had been trying to get approved for over a year. When the codicil was invalidated, that collateral vanished, the loan fell through, and 3 months later, Cody's in-between-deals era became simply unemployed, a fact that reached me secondhand without satisfaction, mostly just as another line item in a story that had never really been about a house. My mother's church circle, the same one she'd used to spread the story of her vindictive older daughter, heard the courthouse steps version within a week. Small counties are efficient that way, and Diane, for the first time in her adult life, found herself on the receiving end of the kind of quiet, whispered social judgment she'd spent 30 years directing at other people's families. She stopped attending the Tuesday prayer group. Aunt Carol, to her credit, called me 2 weeks after the hearing. Not to apologize exactly, but to say, I didn't know about the 11 years, Renata. Nobody told us about the 11 years. I told her that was, in a sentence, the entire problem. My father called me alone, without my mother on the line, for the first time I could remember since before his stroke. He didn't apologize either, not really. That's not who he is, and I'd made peace with that a long time ago. But he said, I saw the spreadsheet. Denise showed your aunt showed me. $612,000, Renata. I didn't know it was that much. I don't think I let myself know. That was, from my father, close enough to everything I'd ever needed him to say. I got the deed to the lake house in December. I didn't move into it. I didn't sell it either, not yet. I hired a contractor. Cash, my own money this time. Freely given because I chose it. Not extracted because nobody asked. And had the dock rebuilt. The one my grandmother used to sit on every summer evening with a mug of coffee, reading. Undisturbed, while the rest of the family argued about something inside the house that never mattered in the morning. I framed the 2014 letter. Not the property deed, the letter. It hangs in my hallway now, at eye level, exactly where the pearl-framed prom photo used to hang in my parents' house. My grandmother's handwriting, slightly browned, 12 years old, finally where it was always supposed to be seen. 10 months later, I hosted Thanksgiving. At the lake house. I invited my father. I invited Aunt Carol, and Ms. Odell, my grandmother's old next-door neighbor, who'd been the one to originally witness that 2014 letter, and who cried, quietly, the first time she saw the dock rebuilt. I invited Denise and Marion because family, I've learned, is occasionally a legal team that believed you before your own mother did. I did not invite Brooke. I did not invite my mother. Not out of revenge. The account by then was fully reconciled, and there was simply nothing left owed on either side, which is the most honest place two people can leave a relationship, even if it's not the ending anyone wanted at the start. My father sat at the head of the table that day. In the house, his mother-in-law had made sure his older daughter would finally get to sit in too, and he raised a glass and he said simply, to Renata, who never asked for anything and gave everything, and finally got asked for nothing back. I've thought a lot, since then, about the sentence that started all of this. She doesn't want the drama this year, and about how wrong Brooke was, and how right, both at once. I never wanted drama. I still don't. What I wanted, for 11 years, was to be seen doing the work I was already doing. When nobody would give me that, I stopped asking, and I let the paperwork say it instead. Paperwork doesn't flatter anyone. It also doesn't forget anyone. That turned out to be exactly what I needed. If you've ever been the one holding a family together financially while getting written out of it socially, I want you to hear this clearly. Quiet isn't the same as invisible, and invisible isn't the same as powerless. Sometimes the truth doesn't need you to raise your voice. It just needs you to keep the receipts and wait for the day someone finally asks to see them. Family isn't the people who share your blood. It's the people who show up, sign the letter, and mean it. If this story felt familiar to you, if you've ever been the fixer nobody thanked, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let me know in the comments what you'd have done differently. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to Home of Secrets. I'll see you in the next one.